Elena Marsh paid $50 at a county auction for a workshop that had been locked and forgotten for a century. The previous owner fled the property without looking back. What she found behind a false wall would reveal why some doors were never meant to be opened. Elena Marsh stood in the county clerk's office on a Tuesday morning that smelled of old paper and desperation. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow that made even the young clerk look ancient. Outside, rain hammered against the windows of the small building in Millbrook County, a place so far removed from anywhere that mattered that even the GPS had trouble finding it. The deed lay on the counter between them, a single sheet of aged paper that represented either salvation or the final nail in Elena's coffin. She wasn't sure which yet. $50, the clerk repeated, her nameplate identifying her as Patricia Holloway. She was a woman in her late 40s with gray streaks in her brown hair and eyes that had seen too many bad decisions walk through her door. That's all you're paying for the Brennan workshop. That's what the auction listing said. Elena kept her voice steady, professional, even though her hands wanted to shake. $50 was nearly half of what she had left in the world. The rest was in her truck, parked outside, a 2008 Ford with 180,000 miles and a check engine light that had been on so long she'd stopped noticing it. Patricia's fingers drummed on the counter, a nervous rhythm that seemed unconscious. Nobody's been inside that building since 1924. That's 100 years, near enough. I know. That's why I'm interested. Historical restoration is my specialty. Elena tried for a smile, the kind that inspired confidence in clients. She'd used it 1,000 times before her business collapsed, before her partner cleaned out their joint account and disappeared, before the bank took everything except her tools and her dog. The smile didn't seem to work on Patricia. Miss Marsh, the clerk said slowly, I've worked in this office for 23 years. I've processed deeds for every piece of property in Millbrook County, some of them multiple times. I've seen buildings sell, get renovated, sell again. That's how it works. But the Brennan workshop. She paused, choosing her words carefully. That place has been on our books since before I was born. Nobody buys it. Nobody even asks about it. Until now, Elena said. Until now, Patricia echoed. She picked up a pen, then set it down again. You're sure about this? Because once you sign, once you own it, there's no taking it back. County won't buy it from you. Nobody will. Why not? Patricia's mouth opened, then closed. She glanced toward the back office where Elena could see another clerk working at a computer, deliberately not looking their way. It's got a history. Every old building has a history. That's what makes them interesting. Not like this one. Patricia's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. People around here, they don't talk about it. But my grandmother, she told me things. About why it closed. About why it stayed closed. Elena felt a prickle of unease run down her spine, but she pushed it aside. She'd heard this before, in a dozen small towns with a dozen old buildings. Every abandoned structure had its ghost story, its local legend, its reason why nobody wanted to touch it. Most of the time, it was just superstition covering up mundane things like foundation problems or toxic materials. I appreciate the warning, Elena said, but I've restored buildings older than this. I know what I'm doing. Patricia stared at her for a long moment, then sighed. All right. It's your funeral. She pushed the deed forward along with a pen. Sign at the bottom. Elena signed. Her handwriting looked confident, even if she didn't feel it. Patricia processed the paperwork with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 10,000 times, but Elena noticed the way she handled the deed, quickly, as if it might burn her fingers. She printed out a receipt, stamped it 3 times with different stamps that all said variations of official county business, and slid the whole packet across the counter. The property is at 4722, Harlow Ridge Road, Patricia said, her tone now purely professional, as if discussing the weather. About 8 miles north of town, up in the hills. You'll see it on the right side. Can't miss it. It's the only building up there. Are their utilities connected? No. Power was cut in 1924. Water too. There's a well on the property, but I wouldn't trust it. The county hasn't inspected anything up there in decades. What about the previous owner? The one who put it up for auction? Patricia's expression shifted, something uncomfortable flickering across her face. Silas Wren. He inherited the property from his father, who inherited it from his father, all the way back to Theodore Brennan himself. The Wrens never lived there, never went near it. Just paid the property taxes every year to keep it from going to the county. She paused. Until last year. What happened last year? Silas stopped paying. He just stopped. We sent notices, made calls, did everything by the book. Finally reached him about 3 months ago. He told us he was done with it, that we could take it, sell it, burn it down for all he cared. Said he never wanted to hear about that place again. Patricia's eyes met Elena's. Then he moved. Left Millbrook County entirely. He'd lived here his whole life, 67 years, and he just packed up and left within a week of that conversation. The unease Elena had felt earlier grew stronger. Did he say why? No. But I saw him the day before he left. At the grocery store. He looked. Patricia searched for the word. Haunted. Like a man running from something he couldn't escape fast enough. Elena took the deed and receipt, folding them carefully and tucking them into her jacket pocket. Thank you for the information. Miss Marsh? Patricia called as Elena turned to leave. If you find something up there, something that doesn't seem right, don't ignore it. Some warnings exist for a reason. Elena nodded, though she didn't believe in warnings. She believed in structural engineering, in historical preservation, in the hard work that turned ruins into something valuable. Warnings were just stories people told themselves to explain away their fears. She walked out into the rain. The drive to 4722, Harlow Ridge Road took exactly 18 minutes according to the GPS, which lost signal twice on the winding road up into the hills. Elena's truck struggled with the incline, the engine making sounds that probably meant expensive repairs she couldn't afford. In the passenger seat, Sable pressed her nose against the window, watching the dense forest roll past. Elena had found Sable 3 years ago in a parking lot behind a hardware store, a half-starved puppy someone had dumped in a cardboard box. The dog had been the best decision Elena had ever made, the one good thing that had come from that terrible year when everything else fell apart. Sable was loyal, intelligent, and had an uncanny ability to sense danger before it arrived. She'd barked at Elena's business partner 2 days before the woman emptied their accounts. She'd refused to enter a building that collapsed a week later due to structural failure. Elena had learned to trust the dog's instincts. Which was why she noticed when Sable's ears went flat as they crested the final hill. The workshop appeared through the trees like something from a fever dream. It was larger than Elena had expected, a 2-story structure of dark red brick that had weathered to the color of dried blood. The building stretched at least 80 feet across, with a peaked roof that sagged dangerously in the middle. Windows ran along both floors, all of them boarded over with planks that had turned gray with age. A stone chimney rose from the center, cracked and crumbling, birds' nests visible in the gaps. The grounds around the workshop had gone completely wild. Trees pressed close on 3 sides, their branches reaching toward the building like grasping fingers. Ivy covered the entire eastern wall, so thick it obscured the bricks completely. The western wall showed signs of water damage, dark stains spreading from the roofline down to the foundation. In front, a rutted driveway led to a pair of massive wooden doors, chained shut with a lock that looked older than Elena. She parked the truck and killed the engine. For a moment, she just sat there, studying the building through the rain-streaked windshield. It was worse than she'd imagined. The roof alone would cost thousands to replace. The foundation probably had issues. God only knew what the interior looked like after a century of neglect. But it was hers. $50 and a signature, and she owned something again. Not much, maybe nothing at all, but it was a start. Come on, girl, Elena said, opening her door. "Let's see what we bought." Sable didn't move. Elena turned to look at the dog. Sable sat rigid in the passenger seat, her eyes fixed on the workshop. A low whine escaped her throat, the kind of sound she made when she was afraid. "Sable, come." The dog looked at Elena, then back at the building. She whined again, louder this time. Elena felt the first real stab of doubt. In 3 years, she'd never seen Sable refuse a direct command. The dog would follow her anywhere, into thunderstorms, through crowded streets, across frozen rivers. But now, faced with an old building in the rain, Sable was terrified. "It's okay," Elena said softly, reaching over to scratch behind the dog's ears. "It's just a building. Old and creaky, but that's all. Nothing to be scared of." Sable's muscles trembled beneath her hand. Elena grabbed her heavy-duty flashlight from the glove compartment and climbed out of the truck. The rain had softened to a drizzle, but the air felt wrong. Too cold for early September, and too still. The forest around them should have been full of sound: birds, insects, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Instead, there was only silence, broken occasionally by the drip of water from leaves. She walked to the passenger side and opened the door. "Come on, Sable. I need you with me." The dog reluctantly jumped down, but stayed pressed against Elena's leg, her head low, ears flat. They approached the workshop together, Elena's boots squelching in the mud that had once been a driveway. Up close, the building looked even worse. The bricks were crumbling in places, the mortar between them cracked and missing. The wooden boards covering the windows had rotted, some hanging by a single nail. The chains on the front doors were thick, the links covered in rust so deep it looked like a disease eating through the metal. Elena pulled out her bolt cutters and positioned them around the lock. It took 3 tries and all her strength, but finally the lock snapped with a crack that echoed across the empty hillside. The chains fell away, hitting the ground with a dull thud. She pulled on the door handle. It resisted at first, the wood swollen from decades of moisture, then gave way suddenly. The door swung inward with a shriek of hinges that sounded almost like a scream. And with it came the smell. Not rot, as Elena had expected. Not mold or animal droppings or the musty scent of long-closed spaces. This was something else entirely. Metallic and sharp, like the air after a lightning strike. Like copper and ozone mixed together. It made her tongue taste strange, made her teeth ache. Beside her, Sable growled. Not the playful growl of a dog seeing a squirrel, but the deep, chest-rumbling growl that meant danger. Real danger. "Easy, girl," Elena whispered. She clicked on her flashlight and aimed it through the doorway. The beam cut through darkness so complete it seemed almost solid. Dust motes danced in the light, thousands of them, disturbed by the opening of the door after a century of stillness. As her eyes adjusted, Elena began to make out shapes. Workbenches. Dozens of them, arranged in neat rows throughout the space. Tools hanging on pegboards, saws, hammers, planes, chisels, all frozen in time, waiting for hands that would never return. The massive shape in the center had to be a lathe, industrial-sized, its wheel locked in place. Everything was exactly as it had been left. As if the workers had simply stood up in the middle of their tasks and walked away, never to return. Elena stepped across the threshold. The temperature dropped immediately, at least 10 degrees. Her breath misted in the air, visible in the beam of her flashlight. In September. In Virginia. Where it had been 75 degrees just minutes ago outside. Her boots echoed on the wooden floor, each step producing a sound that seemed too loud, too hollow. Sable refused to follow, planting herself in the doorway and whimpering. Elena moved deeper into the workshop, sweeping her flashlight across the walls. The brick was in surprisingly good condition despite the exterior deterioration, but something was wrong with it. The brick seemed to absorb her light rather than reflect it, making the beam dimmer the further it penetrated into the space. And then she saw the marks. They covered every surface. The walls, the workbenches, even the floor. Scratches and gouges, some shallow, some carved deep enough to splinter the wood. They weren't random, she could see that immediately. They formed patterns, repeated symbols that looked deliberate. Some resembled tally marks, groups of 5 scratched again and again, hundreds of times. Others looked like maps or diagrams, crude representations of something Elena couldn't quite understand. In one section of the wall, someone had carved words. Elena moved closer, holding the flashlight steady. "Don't open it." The letters were 6 inches tall, carved with something sharp and with enough force to gouge the wood a 1/4 inch deep. Below it, in different handwriting. "Sealed for a reason." And below that, fresher than the others, the wood around it lighter. "God forgive us." Elena felt her pulse quicken. These weren't century-old carvings. At least one of them was recent. Recent enough that the exposed wood hadn't darkened with age. She backed away from the wall, her light sweeping across the floor. That's when she noticed what she'd been hearing without consciously registering it, the hollow sound of her footsteps. She knelt down and rapped her knuckles against the floorboards. Hollow. Definitely hollow. She stood and walked the length of the workshop, knocking every few feet. The entire floor was hollow. There was space beneath, a basement or crawl space that shouldn't exist. The building records Patricia had given her showed the workshop as a single-story structure with a loft space above. Nothing about a basement. Elena moved to the back of the building, to the wall farthest from the entrance. This wall was different from the others. The bricks here looked newer, the mortar less weathered. But that didn't make sense. If anything had been repaired or rebuilt, it should have been the exterior walls, not an interior one. She pressed her palm flat against the bricks. And felt it. A vibration. Faint but unmistakable, like a distant heartbeat or the thrum of machinery running somewhere deep below. Steady. Rhythmic. Wrong. Elena pulled her hand back as if burned. Buildings didn't pulse. They didn't have heartbeats. This had to be something else, water in the pipes, settling foundation, some natural explanation her exhausted brain wasn't finding. She pulled a hammer from her tool belt and tapped along the wall, listening to the sound. Most of the wall produced the solid thunk of brick meeting mortar. But in one section, about 6 feet wide and 7 feet tall, the sound changed. Hollow. There was space behind this wall. A room that wasn't on any building plan, hidden behind bricks that had been laid deliberately to conceal it. Elena's hands were shaking now, though she told herself it was just the cold. She wedged a pry bar into the gap between 2 bricks and pulled. The mortar crumbled like sand, far more easily than it should have. Century-old mortar should have been harder than the bricks themselves, but this came apart with barely any pressure. The first brick came loose in her hands. Then another. Then a dozen more, falling away to reveal darkness behind them. Not just darkness. An absence of light so complete it seemed to swallow her flashlight beam. Like the darkness was a physical thing, a presence that pushed back against illumination. Elena aimed her light into the hole she'd created. The beam penetrated maybe 3 feet before being absorbed completely. She couldn't see walls, couldn't see a ceiling or floor, couldn't see anything except that suffocating blackness that seemed to move, to shift, to breathe. And then she heard it. A sound from within that hidden room. Metal scraping against metal, slow and deliberate. The unmistakable sound of something moving. Something that had been sealed behind this wall for God knew how long, and was now aware that its prison had been breached. The sound came again, closer this time. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. Like something dragging itself across a stone floor. Like something pulling itself toward the opening Elena had just created. Outside, Sable began to bark. Sharp, urgent, desperate. The sound of a dog who knows danger is coming and cannot stop it. Elena stumbled backward, her heart hammering so hard it hurt. The flashlight slipped from her trembling hands and hit the floor, the beam spinning wildly before settling on the hole in the wall. And in that moment, before she could grab the light, before she could run, before she could do anything except stand frozen with terror, Elena saw something in that darkness. A shape. Moving. Coming closer. Elena didn't remember running. One moment she was standing in the workshop, staring at that hole in the wall, and the next she was outside in the drizzle, gasping for air, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grip her truck keys. Sable pressed against her legs, whining and pawing at Elena's jeans, trying to pull her away from the building. The dog's eyes were wide, the whites showing, her entire body trembling. "I know, girl," Elena managed to say. "I know. We're leaving." But she didn't leave. Not yet. Because as her panic subsided and rational thought returned, Elena realized how ridiculous she was being. She'd spent 15 years restoring old buildings. She'd crawled through collapsed basements, climbed rotting staircases, worked in structures that should have killed her a dozen times over. She'd never once run from a building before. Old structures made noises. Especially old structures that had been sealed for a century. Settling foundations, shifting wood, animals that had found their way inside through cracks and holes, all of these could explain what she'd heard. The darkness? That was just her flashlight failing to penetrate decades of accumulated dust and the angle of the space. Nothing supernatural about it. The shape? Probably shadows cast by her spinning flashlight, her oxygen-deprived brain, her exhaustion turning tricks on her eyes. Elena took a deep breath, then another. She was a professional. She didn't believe in ghosts or curses or any of the superstitious nonsense that people use to explain away the perfectly natural deterioration of old buildings. "Stay here," she told Sable, opening the truck door and guiding the dog inside. "I'm just going to grab my flashlight." 2 minutes. Sable barked once, sharp and urgent, but Elena closed the door. She walked back to the workshop entrance. The door still stood open, that darkness within seeming deeper now that the day's light was fading. Elena paused at the threshold, every instinct screaming at her to get back in the truck and drive away. But $50. That's all she had left after this. If she ran now, she lost everything. She stepped inside. The cold hit her again, and that metallic smell, stronger now. Elena moved quickly to where she'd dropped the flashlight. It lay on the floor near the center of the room, its beam still pointed at the wall where she'd made the opening. The hole was larger than she remembered. Much larger. She'd removed maybe a dozen bricks, creating an opening about 2 feet square. But now the hole was at least 4 feet wide, bricks scattered across the floor as if something had pushed them out from the inside. Elena's mouth went dry. She grabbed the flashlight and ran. This time, she didn't stop until she was in the truck, engine running, doors locked. Sable climbed into her lap, something the 60-pound dog never did, and Elena let her. They sat there together, shaking, staring at the workshop through the windshield. The building looked the same as it had an hour ago. Old. Abandoned. Harmless. But Elena knew better now. Patricia had tried to warn her. The previous owner had fled rather than deal with whatever was in that building. The warnings carved into the walls, "Don't open it, sealed for a reason, God forgive US," those weren't superstitious nonsense. They were the desperate messages of people who knew what was behind that wall and had tried to warn whoever came after. Elena put the truck in reverse, ready to leave this place and never come back. But then she stopped. Because she saw them. Documents in the glove compartment where she'd stuffed the deed and paperwork Patricia had given her. And among those papers was something she hadn't looked at closely before, a thick envelope marked Property Records, Brennan Workshop. Elena's hands shook as she pulled out the envelope and opened it. Inside were historical documents, surveys, and at the bottom, a photograph. It was black and white, faded with age, dated 1923. It showed the workshop with a group of workers standing in front. 20 men in work clothes, their faces serious in the way people looked in old photographs. They stood in 3 rows, and Elena's eyes were drawn to the man in the center of the front row. He held something in his hands. A box. Metal, about 2 feet square, with elaborate designs carved into its surface. The man's face was strange, his expression not quite right, as if the photographer had caught him mid-movement or mid-word. Elena flipped the photograph over. Written on the back in faded ink. Final day. May God have mercy on us all. The seal must never be broken. Theodore Brennan, October 15, 1923. The seal must never be broken. Elena looked up at the workshop, at the door standing open, at the darkness within. She had broken the seal. And now she had to decide, run and lose everything, or stay and discover what Theodore Brennan and his workers had sealed away 100 years ago. What secret they had died to protect. Elena didn't sleep that night. She'd driven back to town as the sun set, her mind racing faster than the truck's struggling engine could manage on the winding roads. Sable sat in the passenger seat, unusually quiet, her dark eyes occasionally flickering toward Elena as if checking to make sure her human was still there, still safe. The motel Elena found was called the Restful Inn, though rest seemed impossible. It was the kind of place that charged by the week and didn't ask questions, which was good because Elena didn't have answers. Room 14 smelled like old cigarettes and pine cleaner, the wallpaper peeling in the corners, the bed sagging in the middle. But it was $28 a night, which meant she could afford 3 nights before her money ran out completely. She spread the historical documents across the stained bedspread, the photograph of Theodore Brennan and his workers staring up at her. 20 men. She counted them 3 times to be sure. 20 men holding tools, standing in front of the workshop on what the inscription said was their final day. Final day of what? Elena pulled out her laptop, a 5-year-old model with a cracked screen that still worked if you hit it at the right angle, and connected to the motel's painfully slow Wi-Fi. She started searching. Theodore Brennan, Millbrook County, Virginia brought up surprisingly little. A few mentions in genealogy websites, a census record from 1920 listing him as a master craftsman, age 47, living in Millbrook County with his wife Margaret and 2 daughters, Ruth and Caroline. Brennan Workshop 1923 gave her even less. One archived newspaper article from the Millbrook County Register, dated November 3, 1923. Local workshop closes unexpectedly. The Brennan Workshop, a fixture of our community for 15 years, has closed its doors permanently. Owner Theodore Brennan cited unforeseen circumstances as the reason for the sudden closure. The workshop, which employed 20 skilled craftsmen and produced fine furniture and mill equipment, had been a source of pride for Millbrook County. Several workers were unavailable for comment. Mr. Brennan declined to elaborate on the nature of the circumstances that led to this unfortunate decision. That was it. No other articles, no follow-up, nothing about what happened to the workers or why a successful business would close without warning. Elena searched for Theodore Brennan's death record and found it quickly. He died on October 16, 1923. The day after the photograph. Cause of death listed as heart failure. His wife Margaret had died the same day. Same cause. Their daughters Ruth and Caroline had died within a week. Both causes listed as sudden illness. 4 deaths in one family within 7 days, and nobody had questioned it. No investigation, no autopsy reports that she could find, nothing but brief obituaries saying the Brennan family had tragically passed and would be greatly missed by the community. Elena's stomach tightened. She searched for the other workers, using the few names she could make out from the photograph's edges. 3 of them had death records within 2 weeks of the workshop closing. Heart failure. Accident. Drowning. The rest had simply vanished from the records entirely, as if they'd never existed after October 1923. 20 men went into that workshop. At least 3 died immediately after. The rest disappeared. And the building had been sealed ever since. Elena sat back against the headboard, her mind working through the implications. Whatever happened in that workshop had been bad enough to kill multiple people and make the survivors disappear. Bad enough that the building had been chained shut and left to rot for 100 years. Bad enough that families who inherited it refused to go near it, generation after generation, until finally one of them couldn't take it anymore and fled the county entirely. She thought about the metal box in Theodore Brennan's hands in the photograph. About the words carved into the wall, "The seal must never be broken." Elena had broken it. And something inside had started moving. Sable whined from her spot on the floor, sensing Elena's distress. Elena reached down and scratched the dog's ears, trying to calm them both. "We should leave," Elena said aloud, her voice sounding strange in the empty room. "We should get in the truck tomorrow morning and drive as far as this piece of junk will take us. Forget we ever heard of Millbrook County or the Brennan workshop." But even as she said it, she knew she wouldn't. Couldn't. Because that workshop was hers now. It was the only thing she owned in the world besides her tools, her truck, and the dog at her feet. And more than that, she needed to know. The mystery of it had hooked into her brain like a barbed wire, impossible to remove without tearing something vital. What had Theodore Brennan sealed away? What had killed him and his family and his workers? What was behind that wall, and why had it been hidden for a century? Elena looked at the photograph again, studying every detail she could make out in the faded image. The workshop in the background looked pristine, the bricks clean, the doors wide open. The men's faces were serious but not frightened. Whatever was about to happen hadn't happened yet when this picture was taken. But Theodore Brennan's expression. Elena leaned closer, squinting at the small figure in the center of the front row. His face was blurred, as if he'd moved during the long exposure time cameras required back then. But his eyes, even blurred, even across a century of fading, his eyes looked wrong. Too wide. Too intense. Like a man staring at something no one else could see. Elena's phone buzzed, making her jump. A text from an unknown number. "Stop digging. Leave Millbrook County. This is your only warning." Her hands started shaking again. She stared at the message, reading it 3 times to make sure she'd understood correctly. Someone knew she was researching the workshop. Someone was watching her, even now, in this anonymous motel room in the middle of nowhere. Elena went to the window and carefully pulled back the stained curtain an inch. The parking lot was nearly empty, just her truck, an old sedan with a missing hubcap, and a motorcycle covered with a tarp. No people. No obvious signs of surveillance. But someone had her number. Someone knew what she was doing. Her phone buzzed again. The Brennan family learned the hard way. Don't make the same mistake. Elena's finger hovered over the reply button, then stopped. Responding would confirm she'd seen the messages, would open a dialogue she wasn't sure she wanted to have. Instead, she took a screenshot of both texts, forwarded them to her email as backup, then blocked the number. Sable stood up, her hackles raised, a low growl rumbling from her chest. The dog was staring at the door. Elena grabbed the heavy mag light she kept for emergencies, it doubled as a weapon if needed, and moved to the peephole. The hallway outside was empty, just stained carpet and flickering fluorescent lights. But Sable continued to growl, her body tense, ready to attack. "It's okay, girl," Elena whispered, though she wasn't sure it was. She wedged a chair under the door handle, checked that the chain lock was engaged, and turned off the lights. She sat on the bed in the darkness, mag light in one hand, phone in the other, watching the thin line of light under the door for any shadows that might indicate someone standing outside. An hour passed. Then 2. Finally, around midnight, Sable relaxed and lay back down. Whatever she'd sensed had passed. Elena didn't relax. She sat awake until dawn, watching that line of light, thinking about Theodore Brennan and his 20 workers and the metal box they'd sealed away. Thinking about the hole in the wall that had grown larger when she wasn't looking. Thinking about the choice she had to make, run, or go back. The Millbrook County Library was a small brick building that looked like it had been built in the 1960s and hadn't been updated since. Elena arrived when it opened at 9 o'clock, having stopped at a gas station for terrible coffee that she desperately needed. The librarian was a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled into a neat bun and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. Her nameplate said Judith Kershaw, head librarian. Good morning, Judith said with a warm smile that faded slightly when she actually looked at Elena. Are you all right, dear? You look exhausted. Elena caught a glimpse of herself in the library's window and understood the concern. She hadn't slept, had barely eaten, and stress had drawn dark circles under her eyes that made her look 10 years older than her 32 years. Long night, Elena said. I'm doing some historical research. I was hoping you might be able to help me. Of course. That's what we're here for. What are you researching? The Brennan Workshop. Anything you have from 1923, particularly around October of that year. Judith's smile vanished completely. Her hand, which had been reaching for a pen, froze in midair. The Brennan Workshop. Yes. I'm the new owner. I bought it yesterday at the county auction. Oh. Judith's face had gone pale. Oh my. You're the one. I'm the one what? Judith glanced around the library. They were alone except for an elderly man reading a newspaper in the corner, far out of earshot. She leaned forward and lowered her voice. You're the one Patricia called about. She said someone had actually bought that place. We didn't think, we hoped no one would. Why? Elena asked, though she was starting to understand. What's wrong with the workshop? What's wrong with it? Judith let out a short, bitter laugh. My dear, everything is wrong with it. That building should have been torn down decades ago, but nobody will touch it. Not the county, not contractors, nobody. Because of what happened in 1923. Because of what happened in 1923, Judith confirmed. She studied Elena's face for a long moment, then seemed to come to a decision. Wait here. She disappeared into the back of the library, leaving Elena standing at the circulation desk. Sable, who Elena had left in the truck with the windows cracked, was probably getting impatient. But this was important. Judith returned carrying a cardboard box that looked old enough to be archival. She set it on the desk with a soft thud. These are the original documents from 1923. Newspaper clippings, some personal journals that were donated to the library, photographs. Everything we have about the Brennan Workshop and what happened that October. The newspaper article I found online was very brief. It said the workshop closed due to unforeseen circumstances. That's the public version, Judith said. The version they printed to avoid panic. But there were other articles, ones that never made it to the archives. And there were journals, letters, testimony that was sealed by the county. She opened the box and pulled out a leather-bound journal. This belonged to Reverend Michael Hartley. He was the minister at St. Catherine's Church in 1923. He documented everything that happened in the final weeks before the workshop closed. Elena's hands trembled as she took the journal. The leather was cracked with age, the pages yellowed and brittle. She opened it carefully to the first entry dated October 1, 1923. Theodore Brennan came to see me today. The man is troubled, deeply troubled. He spoke of his work at the workshop, of a commission they received 6 months ago from a private collector. He would not tell me the nature of this commission, only that it required specific materials and specific knowledge that he wishes now he had never possessed. He asked me if a man could be forgiven for creating something terrible, even if he did so unknowingly. I assured him that God's mercy is infinite, but Theodore did not seem comforted. He said, some things, once made, cannot be unmade. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed. I fear for his soul. Elena looked up at Judith. What was he making? What commission? Nobody knows for certain, Judith said. The collector who hired him was never identified. But there are clues in the journal. Keep reading. Elena flipped through the pages, finding more entries. October 5, 1923. Theodore came again, in the middle of the night this time, pounding on the rectory door. He was wild-eyed, desperate. He said the work was nearly complete, that it would be finished by the 15th. He said once it was done, he would seal it away where it could never be found, never be used. Reverend, he told me, Pray that no one ever opens what we have made. Pray that it stays sealed until the end of days. I asked him what they had created. He would only say, a door. We built a door, and something is on the other side, waiting to come through. October 10th, 1923, I went to the workshop today, against my better judgment. Theodore had stopped coming to services, and I was concerned for him and his workers. The building was locked, all the windows covered. But I could hear sounds from inside. Machinery, yes, but also voices. Chanting in a language I did not recognize. And beneath it all, a sound like. I hesitate to write this, for I fear it sounds like madness, but it sounded like breathing. As if the building itself were alive. October 15th, 1923, it is finished. Theodore came at dawn with his workers. 20 men, their faces haggard, their eyes haunted. They told me they had completed the commission and sealed it in a special chamber within the workshop. Theodore gave me a metal box containing all the plans, all the specifications, everything that would be needed to understand what they had built. He begged me to destroy it, but I could not. Instead, I sealed it in the church vault with instructions that it never be opened. Theodore's last words to me, if anyone ever breaks the seal, Reverend, if anyone ever opens that chamber, God help us all. Because what we put in there must never get out. October 16th, 1923, Theodore Brennan is dead. His wife Margaret as well. Both found in their beds this morning, their faces frozen in expressions of absolute terror. The doctor says heart failure, but I saw their faces. They did not die from their hearts giving out. They died from fear. From seeing something no human was meant to see. October 17th, 1923, 3 of the workers are dead now. 2 more have disappeared. The others refuse to speak of what happened in the workshop. I went to the building today with the sheriff. It was sealed tight, chains on every door, boards over every window. From inside, we heard movement. Scraping. Something dragging itself across the floor. The sheriff wanted to investigate. I stopped him. Whatever is in there must stay in there. The journal entries ended there. Elena looked up at Judith, her mind reeling. A door. They built a door. A door to where? Judith asked quietly. That's the question no one could answer. The church vault that Reverend Hartley mentioned? It was destroyed in a fire in 1947. Everything in it was lost, including the metal box with the plans. But the workshop remained sealed. Until yesterday. Until you. Judith pulled out another document from the box, a letter written in shaky handwriting. This was written by Samuel Morrison, one of the workers who survived. He wrote it in 1956, 3 years before he died. It was found among his belongings and donated to the library. Elena took the letter and read. To whoever finds this. My name is Samuel Morrison. I am 74 years old, and I am dying. Before I go, I must tell the truth about what happened at the Brennan workshop in October of 1923. We were hired to build something. A box, we were told. A container with very specific dimensions and materials. The collector who commissioned it provided exact specifications, measurements down to the fraction of an inch, materials that had to be sourced from particular places, even the time of day when certain parts could be assembled. At first, it seemed like just another eccentric rich man's project. We'd built strange things before. But as the work progressed, things began to happen. Tools would move when nobody was looking. We'd hear whispers in empty rooms. The temperature would drop suddenly, no matter how warm the day. Theodore realized something was wrong halfway through the project. But by then, it was too late to stop. The collector had paid us a fortune, enough to keep the workshop running for years. And besides, we'd already begun. You can't unbuild something like that. The very act of construction had opened something. A connection. A pathway. On October 15th, we finished. The box was complete, sealed with locks that had no keys, covered in symbols none of us understood but all of us had been instructed to carve. And when we sealed the final piece into place, we felt it. All of us. Like something on the other side had just noticed us. Like a predator catching the scent of prey. Theodore ordered us to build a chamber within the workshop, a room within a room. We bricked it up with the box inside, and he told us to go home, to forget we'd ever worked on this project, to never speak of it again. But you can't forget something like that. You can't forget the moment you realize you've built a door to somewhere else. Somewhere wrong. The collector never came to claim his box. We tried to find him. Theodore spent weeks searching, but it was as if he'd never existed. No address, no name, nothing but the money he'd paid us and the plans he'd provided. I was one of the lucky ones. I left Millbrook County that same month and never went back. But the others, some of them couldn't leave. Something held them there. Something called to them from inside that sealed chamber. If you're reading this, if you've somehow found your way to the Brennan workshop, please listen to me. Do not open the chamber. Do not break the seal. What's in that box is not meant for this world. It's a door, and something on the other side is waiting. It has been waiting for 100 years. It will wait 100 more if it has to. But if you open it, if you give it a way through. God help us all. Elena set down the letter with shaking hands. The words echoed in her mind. It's a door, and something on the other side is waiting. She thought about the hole in the wall she'd created yesterday. About the darkness that had seemed to swallow light. About the scraping sound of something moving, dragging itself closer. She'd opened the seal. And whatever had been waiting for a century knew it. What do I do? Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Judith closed the box of documents slowly, her expression grave. You leave. You get in your truck and you drive away from Millbrook County and you never look back. I can't. I spent everything I had on that property. I have nowhere else to go. Then you'll end up like Theodore Brennan and his family. Dead before the week is out, your face frozen in terror, your heart stopped by something that can't be explained by medical science. Elena thought about the threatening texts she'd received last night. About Sable's terror at the workshop. About the photograph of 20 men who'd built something they didn't understand and paid for it with their lives. But she also thought about the deed in her pocket, about her empty bank account, about the fact that running wouldn't actually solve anything. Whatever she'd released by breaking that seal, it was her responsibility now. What if I could seal it again? Elena asked. What if I could brick up the wall, reinforce it, make sure whatever's in there stays in there? Judith stared at her as if she'd suggested jumping off a cliff. You think you can just slap some mortar on those bricks and everything will be fine? Child, they sealed that chamber with intent, with purpose, possibly with rituals we don't understand. You'd need to know exactly what they did, exactly how they did it. The metal box that Reverend Hartley put in the church vault, you said it contained all the plans, all the specifications. What if there are copies somewhere? What if someone documented how the seal was made? Judith shook her head. Even if such documents existed, even if you could find them, you'd be better off just staying away. Let the building collapse on its own. Let whatever's in there stay trapped in the rubble. And what if it doesn't stay trapped? What if it gets out anyway? Elena leaned forward. Judith, I opened it. Me. If something happens because of that, it's my responsibility. I can't just walk away and hope for the best. The librarian studied Elena's face for a long moment, then sighed. You have your grandmother's stubbornness, I think. You knew my grandmother? No, but I know the look. The look of someone who's decided to do something foolish no matter what anyone says. Judith paused. There might be one person who knows more. Silas Wren's mother, Dorothy Wren. She's 93, lives in a nursing home in the next county. The Wren family owned that workshop for generations, passed it down father to son. If anyone knows the secrets, if anyone knows what was really sealed in there, it would be her. Elena stood up. Where's the nursing home? Pinehurst Care Facility, about 40 minutes north. But Elena, Judith caught her arm. Be careful. The people who know about the Brennan workshop, the ones who've carried that knowledge all these years, they're afraid. Deathly afraid. And fear makes people do dangerous things. Elena nodded, gathering up the documents. Can I take these with me? I'm not supposed to let historical documents leave the library. Judith paused. But I'm also not supposed to let young women walk into death traps with their eyes open. Take them. If it helps you survive, it's worth breaking the rules. Elena carefully packed the journal and letters into her backpack. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Judith said. Not until you're safely out of Millbrook County and whatever you stirred up stays buried where it belongs. As Elena turned to leave, Judith called out one more time. Elena? The texts you received last night, the threats? Elena froze. How did you know about those? Because everyone who gets close to the truth about the Brennan workshop receives them. It's how they protect the secret. How they keep people from digging too deep. Judith's expression was grim. The question is, who are they? Who's been guarding that workshop all these years, and what are they willing to do to keep its secrets? Elena didn't have an answer. She walked out of the library into the bright morning sunlight, the weight of a century-old mystery heavy in her backpack. Sable greeted her with enthusiastic tail wags, happy just to see her again. We're going on a little road trip, girl, Elena said, scratching the dog's ears. Going to talk to someone who might know what we're dealing with. As she pulled out of the library parking lot, Elena didn't notice the black sedan that had been parked 3 spaces down. Didn't see it pull out behind her and follow at a careful distance. But Sable noticed. The dog watched through the rear window, her ears flat, a low growl rumbling in her chest. They weren't alone anymore. The Pinehurst Care Facility was a sprawling single-story building surrounded by manicured lawns and gardens that probably looked cheerful in the summer. In early September, with the leaves just beginning to turn and a gray overcast sky threatening rain, it looked more like a place where people went to fade away quietly. Elena signed in at the front desk, stating she was there to visit Dorothy Wren. The receptionist, a young woman with kind eyes and too much makeup, checked her computer. Mrs. Wren is in the memory care unit, she said. Room 127. Just follow the blue line on the floor. But I should warn you, she has good days and bad days. Today might be a bad day. I'll take my chances, Elena said. The memory care unit was locked, requiring a code to enter. The receptionist gave it to her with a reminder not to share it. It was to keep the residents from wandering off, she explained gently. Elena followed the blue line through corridors that smelled of antiseptic and cafeteria food, past rooms where elderly people sat watching TV or sleeping or staring at nothing at all. She'd visited her own grandfather in a place like this, years ago, before he died. She remembered the feeling of helplessness, of watching someone fade away piece by piece until only the shell remained. Room 127 was at the end of a hallway. The door stood open, revealing a small room with a hospital bed, a TV playing on mute, and a recliner positioned by the window. In the recliner sat a tiny woman who seemed to have shrunk with age, her white hair wispy, her hands folded in her lap. Dorothy Wren's eyes were closed, but they opened when Elena knocked softly on the doorframe. Mrs. Wren? My name is Elena Marsh. I was hoping I could talk to you for a few minutes. Dorothy's eyes focused on her with surprising sharpness. I don't know you. No, ma'am. But I recently purchased a property that used to belong to your family. The Brennan workshop. The change in Dorothy's expression was immediate and dramatic. Her face went pale, her hands clutched the arms of her recliner, and her breath came in short, sharp gasps. You bought it? You bought that cursed place? Yes, ma'am. 2 days ago. Then you're a fool. Dorothy's voice was stronger now, sharp with fear and anger. A damned fool, if you'll excuse my language. Nobody should own that property. It should be burned to the ground, the ashes scattered, the earth salted so nothing ever grows there again. Elena stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. Mrs. Wren, I need to know what's in that workshop. What's behind the sealed wall? You opened it. It wasn't a question. Dorothy's eyes bored into Elena's. You opened the chamber. I didn't know. Of course you didn't know. Nobody knows. That's the point. My family has kept that secret for 100 years, kept that workshop locked and abandoned, paid the taxes year after year just to make sure nobody ever went near it. Dorothy's hands shook. And now you've gone and opened it. Please, Elena said, sitting in the chair beside Dorothy's recliner. I need to understand what's happening. I found documents at the library, journals, letters. They talk about a door, about something waiting on the other side. What is it? What did Theodore Brennan build? Dorothy was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the gray sky. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, distant, as if she were reciting a story she'd heard long ago. My grandfather was one of the 20 workers, she said. James Wren. He was a young man in 1923, just 24 years old, newly married, with a baby on the way. He needed the work Theodore was offering, needed the money. So he signed on without asking too many questions. What did they build? A container. A box made of specific materials, iron from a meteor that had fallen in Russia, wood from a tree that had been struck by lightning 7 times, glass from a church that had burned with its congregation inside. Materials with meaning, with history, with resonance, I suppose you'd call it. And they built it according to plans provided by a man nobody knew, a collector who paid in gold and disappeared before the work was finished. Dorothy closed her eyes. My grandfather said they knew something was wrong halfway through. The workshop started changing. Distances became strange, a room that should have been 30 feet across felt like it went on forever. Shadows moved independently of their sources. Time became elastic, they'd work for what felt like an hour and find 6 hours had passed, or work for a day and discover only minutes had gone by. What was in the box? Nothing. At first, nothing. It was empty when they built it. But Theodore realized, too late, that they hadn't built a container to hold something. They'd built a doorway to let something in. The box was a threshold, a crossing point between our world and somewhere else. Somewhere that shouldn't be able to touch our reality, but can, if you build the right kind of bridge. Elena felt ice forming in her stomach. So there's something in the workshop. Something that came through. No. Dorothy opened her eyes, and they were filled with tears. That's what makes it so terrible. Nothing came through. Not yet. Because Theodore realized what he'd done, realized what they'd created, and sealed it before the crossing could complete. He bricked up the chamber, performed rituals he'd learned from the collector's plans, rituals meant to strengthen the seal, not create it. And then he waited. Waited for what? For the thing on the other side to notice. And it did notice. The night of October 15th, everyone who'd worked on the box felt it. My grandfather said it was like something vast and ancient and hungry had turned its attention toward them, like an eye opening in the darkness and looking directly at you. Theodore and his wife died that night from the sheer terror of being seen by something that should not exist. But your grandfather survived. Because he ran. That very night, he packed his family and fled Millbrook County. But the property stayed in the family, passed down father to son with one instruction: never open the workshop, never break the seal, never give that thing on the other side a way through. Dorothy reached out and grabbed Elena's hand with surprising strength. My grandson Silas, the one who finally put the property up for auction, he did it because he couldn't take it anymore. The dreams, the whispers, the feeling of being watched. The curse of being a Wren. We've all felt it, all of us descended from the men who built that box. A connection to something that wants desperately to cross over, and we're the only things standing in its way. What happens if it crosses over? What is it? I don't know. My grandfather didn't know. Theodore never told anyone except Reverend Hartley, and the Reverend took that knowledge to his grave. Dorothy's grip tightened. But I know this, Theodore Brennan was a God-fearing man, a good man, and whatever he saw on the other side of that door scared him badly enough to take his own life rather than risk it getting through. Elena's blood ran cold. He killed himself? The death certificate said heart failure. The death certificate lied. So did all the others. They died by their own hands, every one of them, because the alternative, living with the knowledge of what they almost unleashed, was worse than death. Dorothy released Elena's hand. You have to seal it again. Brick it up, reinforce it, make it stronger than before. Because every moment that chamber is open, every second that seal is broken, that thing on the other side is working its way through. How? How do I seal it? The same way Theodore did. With intention, with specific materials, with rituals. Dorothy fumbled in the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. My grandfather wrote down what Theodore told him. The basics of the seal. It's not complete, he didn't remember everything, but it's something. Elena unfolded the paper. It was covered in cramped handwriting, diagrams and symbols mixed with instructions. Salt in a circle, unbroken. Iron nails from a gallows, driven at the cardinal points. Bricks laid with mortar mixed with graveyard dirt. Words spoken backward, prayers inverted. Mirror the door to close the door. What was opened by creation must be closed by destruction. I don't understand half of this, Elena said. Then you'd better find someone who does. Because you have maybe 3 days before that thing completes its crossing. 3 days before whatever Theodore sealed away breaks free. Dorothy's eyes were haunted. And when it does, it won't stop with you. It will spread. Consume. Transform. My grandfather said Theodore showed him a vision of what would happen if the door opened fully. He said it would be like a cancer in reality itself, spreading outward from the workshop, corrupting everything it touched, until nothing remained but an empty world wearing the skin of ours. Elena stood up on shaking legs. Thank you. Thank you for telling me. Don't thank me. Just stop it. Seal that chamber. Save yourself and everyone else. Dorothy paused. And if you can't, if it's too late, burn the workshop. Burn it to the ground with everything inside it. It won't kill what's in there, but it might slow it down. Might give people time to run. Elena left the nursing home in a daze, the instructions clutched in her hand, Dorothy's words echoing in her mind. 3 days. She had 3 days to figure out how to seal a doorway to another dimension using materials she didn't have and rituals she didn't understand. And somewhere behind her, the black sedan that had followed her from the library continued to watch and wait. Elena didn't notice the black sedan following her until she was halfway back to Millbrook County. She'd been too distracted, her mind churning through everything Dorothy Wren had told her, trying to make sense of instructions that seemed to belong more to folklore than reality. Salt circles. Iron nails from a gallows. Prayers spoken backward. It all sounded insane. But so did a doorway to another dimension hidden in an abandoned workshop, and she'd seen that with her own eyes. She glanced in the rearview mirror for the 4th time in as many minutes, and there it was again, the black sedan, maintaining a careful 3-car distance. It had been behind her since she left Pinehurst Care Facility, following through 2 lane changes and a deliberate wrong turn she'd taken to test her suspicions. Sable noticed too. The dog sat up in the passenger seat, looking through the back window, her body tense. I see it, girl, Elena muttered. Question is, what do we do about it? Her phone sat in the cup holder, Dorothy's handwritten instructions photographed and saved. Elena had also taken pictures of every page from Reverend Hartley's journal and Samuel Morrison's letter. If something happened to her, at least the information would survive. The sedan followed her all the way to the Millbrook County limits, then suddenly turned off onto a side road and disappeared. Elena watched it go, her heart still racing. Whoever had been following her knew where she was headed now. Knew she'd visited Dorothy Wren. Knew she was gathering information about the workshop. The question was, what would they do with that knowledge? She pulled into the parking lot of a diner called Mabel's Place, needing food and coffee and a few minutes to think without driving. The diner was the kind of place that had probably looked exactly the same since 1975, vinyl booths, checkered floor, a jukebox in the corner that looked functional. Only 3 other customers sat scattered throughout, each occupying their own booth in their own world. Elena chose a seat by the window where she could see her truck and Sable inside it. She ordered coffee and whatever the special was without really listening to the waitress describe it. When the food arrived, meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans that looked like they'd been cooked since morning, she ate mechanically, her mind elsewhere. She spread Dorothy's instructions on the table beside her plate, studying them again. Some parts made a kind of twisted sense. Salt was used in protection rituals across dozens of cultures. Iron was supposed to ward off supernatural entities in folklore. But mirror the door to close the door, what did that even mean? And what was opened by creation must be closed by destruction. Did that mean she had to destroy the box Theodore Brennan had built? How could she destroy something that was sealed behind a brick wall with something dangerous on the other side? That's some interesting reading material. Elena looked up sharply. A man stood beside her booth, tall and thin with silver hair combed back from a high forehead. He wore an expensive charcoal suit that looked completely out of place in Mabel's place, and his smile didn't reach his eyes. Those eyes were pale blue, almost gray, and they studied Elena with the intensity of someone cataloging every detail. "Can I help you?" Elena asked, her hand instinctively moving toward her phone. "I think it's more a question of whether I can help you." The man gestured to the seat across from her. "May I?" "I'd rather you didn't." He sat down anyway, that false smile never wavering. "My name is Marcus Treadwell. I represent certain interests in Millbrook County, business interests, historical interests, preservation interests. I understand you recently purchased the old Brennan workshop." Elena's guard went up immediately. Word travels fast. It's a small county. People talk. Marcus folded his hands on the table, his manicured nails catching the diner's fluorescent light. "I'm here to make you an offer. A very generous offer. I'm not interested in selling." "You haven't heard the offer yet." "I don't need to. I just bought the property 2 days ago. I'm not selling." Marcus's smile finally faded, replaced by something colder and more calculating. "Miss Marsh, Elena, if I may, you seem like an intelligent woman. Intelligent enough to understand when you're in over your head. That workshop is not a restoration project. It's not an investment opportunity. It's a liability that has destroyed everyone who's tried to claim it. Is that a threat?" "It's a fact." Marcus pulled out a leather wallet and extracted a check, already filled out, and slid it across the table. $50,000. That's 1,000 times what you paid for it. Enough money to start over somewhere else, somewhere far from Millbrook County. Elena looked at the check. $50,000. It was more money than she'd seen in 2 years. It would solve every financial problem she had, would let her relocate, start her business again somewhere new, somewhere without mysterious workshops and sealed chambers. She picked up the check and tore it in half. Marcus's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those pale eyes. Something dangerous. That was unwise. That was my choice. The workshop is mine, legally purchased. If you want it, you can wait until I decide to sell it, which won't be any time soon. You don't understand what you're dealing with. Then explain it to me." Elena leaned forward. "Because I've spent the last 2 days trying to understand, and all I get are vague warnings and cryptic threats. If you know something about that workshop, tell me. Otherwise, leave me alone." Marcus was silent for a long moment, studying her face as if trying to determine whether she was brave or simply stupid. Finally, he spoke, his voice lower, more serious. "There are things in this world that exist in the spaces between rational explanation. Things that our ancestors understood better than we do, even if they lacked the vocabulary to describe them properly. They called them demons, spirits, gods, names that meant dangerous and unknowable and stay away." He paused. the Brennan workshop contains one of those things. Has contained it for a century, sealed behind brick and mortar and intention. And you, in your ignorance, have broken that seal. I know, Elena said quietly. I know what I did. That's why I'm trying to fix it. You can't fix it. Marcus's voice was flat, certain. The seal was made by Theodore Brennan using knowledge that died with him. Even if you had the complete instructions, even if you knew every ritual, every material, every word that needed to be spoken, you're not him. You don't have his knowledge, his understanding, his connection to what was sealed. At best, you'd create a weak barrier that would fail within months. At worst, you'd strengthen the thing behind the door by giving it more attention, more focus, more awareness of our world. So what do you suggest? Just abandon it? Let whatever's in there break free? No. You sell it to me. You sign over the deed, take the money, and leave. My organization has the resources, the knowledge, and the experience to contain what Theodore Brennan sealed away. We've been preparing for this eventuality for decades, waiting for the day someone inevitably broke the seal. We can handle it. Elena studied him carefully. What organization? One that has existed in various forms for centuries. We monitor places like the Brennan workshop, locations where the boundaries between worlds have been weakened or breached. We keep them contained, keep them secret, keep the general population safe from things they're better off not knowing about. And you just expect me to trust you? Hand over the property to some secret organization I've never heard of? I expect you to be pragmatic. To recognize when you're outmatched. Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the table to replace the torn check. This is my private number. Call me when you're ready to accept reality. The offer stands for 48 hours. After that, the situation becomes more complicated. Complicated how? Marcus stood up, straightening his already straight tie. After that, I can no longer guarantee your safety. There are others interested in the workshop, others who don't share my preference for civilized negotiation. Some of them believe the door should be open fully, that what's on the other side deserves to cross over. Others simply want to exploit it for their own purposes. All of them are dangerous, and all of them know you broke the seal. The threatening texts. Probably. Or perhaps just concerned locals trying to scare you off before you do more damage. Marcus moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing, Elena. Every hour that chamber remains open, the thing on the other side grows stronger, more present in our world. You've already noticed it, haven't you? The cold, the strange sounds, the feeling of being watched. It's bleeding through, little by little. In 3 days, maybe 4, it won't need the door anymore. It will be here, fully manifested, and then containment becomes impossible. He left the diner without waiting for a response. Elena sat alone in her booth, staring at the business card. It was simple, expensive-looking cardstock with just a name, Marcus Treadwell, and a phone number. No company name, no address, no email. The kind of card carried by people who operated in shadows. Everything Marcus had said could be a lie, an elaborate con to steal her property. But it could also be the truth, or at least a version of it. She thought about Dorothy Wren's warning, about Theodore Brennan's suicide, about the workers who had died or disappeared. About the feeling she'd had in the workshop, the certainty that something was watching her from behind that wall. The waitress appeared with a coffee refill Elena didn't remember ordering. You okay, honey? You look like you've seen a ghost. Maybe I have, Elena muttered. She paid her bill, leaving a generous tip from money she couldn't afford to spare, and walked out to her truck. Sable greeted her with relieved whines, and Elena sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, not starting the engine, just thinking. She had 3 choices, as far as she could see. 1. Take Marcus Treadwell's offer. Sell the workshop, take the money, leave Millbrook County and whatever was in that sealed chamber to people who claimed they knew how to handle it. 2. Try to seal it herself using Dorothy's incomplete instructions and hope that was enough to contain whatever Theodore Brennan had trapped a century ago. 3. Find someone who actually understood this occult nonsense, someone who could help her seal the chamber properly, permanently. Option 1 felt like giving up, like letting someone else clean up her mess. Option 2 felt like a good way to make things worse. Which left option 3, but where did she even start looking for someone with expertise in dimensional doorways and supernatural containment? Her phone buzzed. Another text from an unknown number. You spoke to the old woman. Now you know too much. Leave tonight or face consequences. Then another. Treadwell lies. His organization wants to open the door, not seal it. Trust no one. And a third. The workshop belongs to those who understand its purpose. You are not worthy. Surrender it or be removed. 3 different numbers, 3 different threats or warnings. Elena stared at them, trying to determine if any were genuine or if this was all elaborate psychological warfare designed to make her paranoid. A knock on her window made her jump. She looked up to find a woman standing beside her truck, middle-aged with graying brown hair and worried eyes. She wore jeans and a flannel shirt, work boots covered in mud, and carried herself with the confidence of someone used to physical labor. Elena cracked the window an inch. Yes? Elena Marsh? My name is Rebecca Santos. I need to talk to you about the Brennan workshop. Please. It's urgent. Everyone seems to need to talk to me about the workshop. What makes you different? Because my great-grandfather was one of the 20 workers. Because my family has been guarding the truth about what happened there for 100 years. And because if you trust Marcus Treadwell, if you sell him that property, you'll doom us all. Elena studied the woman's face, looking for signs of deception or madness. She saw only fear and desperate sincerity. Get in, Elena said, unlocking the passenger door. Rebecca climbed in, keeping a respectful distance from Sable, who sniffed her suspiciously before settling down. The woman smelled like sawdust and paint thinner, familiar scents that reminded Elena of her own work. Thank you for listening, Rebecca said. Most people in town won't even acknowledge the workshop exists, let alone talk about it. I've noticed that conspiracy of silence. So tell me, what's your version of the truth? My great-grandfather was Antonio Santos, one of Theodore Brennan's master craftsmen. He was there the day they finished building the box, there when Theodore sealed the chamber. He was one of the survivors. Rebecca pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket, old and worn from being carried for years. Before he died, he wrote down everything he remembered about the sealing ritual. Not just the basics, but the specifics, the order of steps, the exact words Theodore spoke, the materials he used and where he got them. Elena's pulse quickened. Why are you telling me this? Why help me? Because the Santos family has known for 100 years that eventually someone would break the seal. It was inevitable. Buildings decay, chains rust, people forget why something was forbidden in the first place. We've been waiting, preparing, hoping that when it happened, we'd be able to fix it. Rebecca's eyes were bright with unshed tears. My great-grandfather spent his entire life studying what Theodore did, trying to understand it, trying to preserve the knowledge in case it was needed again. And now it is needed. Now someone has to stand in Theodore Brennan's place and complete the seal. And you think I can do that? I think you have to try. Because Marcus Treadwell and his organization, they're not protectors. They're collectors. They find places where the boundaries are weak and they study them, experiment on them, try to find ways to exploit them. If Treadwell gets control of the workshop, he won't seal it. He'll try to stabilize the door, keep it permanently open but controlled, use it for whatever purposes his masters have in mind. How do you know this? Because they approached my family 20 years ago, offered us money to share what we knew about the sealing ritual. When we refused, they tried threats. When that didn't work, they tried worse. Rebecca's voice hardened. My brother disappeared 10 years ago after he started asking too many questions about the workshop. The sheriff ruled it a voluntary missing person case, said Carlos just took off one day. But I know better. Treadwell's people made him disappear because he got too close to the truth. Elena felt the weight of something larger than she'd imagined settling on her shoulders. This wasn't just about an old building or a local legend. There were multiple groups with competing interests, all of them dangerous, all of them willing to hurt people to get what they wanted. Why should I trust you over Treadwell? Because I'm not asking you to sell me the property. I'm not asking for money or control or anything except the chance to help you seal that chamber properly before something terrible gets through. Rebecca unfolded the paper she'd been holding. This is Antonio's account of the sealing. It's detailed, specific. With this and what you learned from Dorothy Wren, we might actually have enough to recreate what Theodore did. Elena took the paper and read. October 15th, 1923, what we did today will haunt me forever, but it had to be done. Theodore gathered us in the workshop after the box was complete. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks, his eyes wild, his hands shaking. He told us we had made a terrible mistake, that the box we'd built was not a container but a doorway, and something on the other side was already trying to cross through. He had us build a chamber around the box, brick walls with no mortar at first, just stones stacked carefully. Then he prepared the mortar using specific ingredients, Portland cement mixed with salt from the Dead Sea, ash from a burned Bible, and dirt from 7 graves of people who died violently. He made us mix it clockwise while he spoke words in a language none of us recognized. We mortared the bricks starting at the eastern wall and working clockwise. At each cardinal point, east, south, west, north, Theodore drove an iron nail through the mortar into the brick beneath. He said the nails came from a gallows where 7 men had been hanged, bought from an executioner in another state. Each nail was driven while speaking a name backward, 7 syllables reversed. When the walls were complete, Theodore drew a circle of salt around the entire chamber, then a second circle within the first, and a third within the second. 3 circles, each drawn counterclockwise while speaking prayers from different faiths, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, others I didn't recognize. He was binding the chamber with every form of divine protection he could invoke. The final step was the strangest. Theodore had us bring 7 mirrors, each one taken from a place of death, a hospital, a funeral home, a battlefield. He positioned them around the chamber in a specific pattern, angled so each reflected the next, creating a loop of reflection. He said this would mirror the door, turn its energy back on itself, create a paradox that would prevent the crossing from completing. When it was done, the temperature in the workshop dropped so suddenly that frost formed on the walls. We heard sounds from within the sealed chamber, not the scraping or dragging we'd heard before, but something worse. Screaming. Not human screaming, but the sound of rage and frustration from something that had been denied entry to our world. Theodore collapsed afterward. We had to carry him home. He told me that night that the seal would hold for as long as the mirrors remained intact, as long as the salt circles were unbroken, as long as no one deliberately tried to open the chamber from the outside. He said if any of those protections failed, we would have days at most before the crossing completed. I asked him what would come through if it did. He wouldn't say. He just wept and told me to pray I never found out. Elena looked up from the paper, her mind racing. This is incredibly detailed. This is exactly what I need. There's a problem, Rebecca said quietly. Several problems, actually. The materials Theodore used, salt from the Dead Sea, gallows nails, mirrors from places of death, those aren't things you can just order online. Some of them are nearly impossible to obtain legally. And even if you could get them, the ritual itself requires knowledge we don't have. The words Theodore spoke, the language he used, the exact pronunciation, Antonio didn't write those down because he didn't understand them. So what do? We improvise. We use what we can get, substitute where we have to, and hope that intention matters as much as perfect execution. It's risky, but it's the only chance we have. Rebecca pulled out her phone and showed Elena a list. I've been preparing for this possibility for years. I have most of the materials already, salt, iron nails, mortar components. The mirrors are going to be tricky, but I know where we might be able to get them. The words, we'll have to research, find the closest approximation we can. Elena felt a surge of hope for the first time since she'd broken the seal. You've really been preparing for this. My whole life. My great-grandfather made me promise when I was a little girl that if the seal ever broke, if someone ever opened the chamber, I would do everything in my power to close it again. I've studied everything I could find about protective rituals, binding spells, containment protocols from a dozen different traditions. I'm not an expert, but I know more than most. When can we start? Tonight. We need to work fast. Treadwell knows you broke the seal, which means his organization is already making plans. And whoever sent you those threatening texts, they're probably watching the workshop, waiting for their chance to act. We have a very narrow window of opportunity. Wait. Elena held up her hand. How do you know about the texts? I didn't mention them. Rebecca had the grace to look embarrassed. Because I sent one of them. The second one, telling you not to trust Treadwell. I was trying to warn you without revealing myself yet. I didn't know if you'd believe me, didn't know if you were already working with his organization. I had to be careful. Elena wanted to be angry about the deception, but she understood the logic. Trust was a commodity in short supply when everyone had their own agenda. Who sent the other two? The first one, telling you to leave or face consequences. That's probably the local protection group. They're well-meaning but ignorant, think the best solution is just to scare people away from the workshop and hope it never becomes a problem. The third one, claiming you're not worthy, that sounds like the Covenant. The Covenant? Rebecca's expression darkened. A cult that's been operating in this region for decades, maybe longer. They believe the door should be opened, that what's on the other side is some kind of deity or higher power that deserves to enter our world. They've been trying to get access to the workshop for years, but the Wren family always blocked them. Now that the property has been sold to an outsider. She trailed off meaningfully. They'll try to stop me from resealing it. Worse. They'll try to open it fully. Complete the crossing that Theodore prevented. Rebecca glanced out the window nervously, as if expecting to see cultists surrounding the truck. We need to move fast. Tonight, before they organize, before Treadwell makes his next move, before whoever else is interested decides to act. One night to gather materials, perform the ritual, and hope it's enough to contain what you released. Elena looked at Sable, who had been listening to the conversation with alert, intelligent eyes. The dog whined softly, as if understanding the stakes. Then Elena looked at Rebecca, at this woman who had spent her life preparing for a crisis she'd hoped would never come. Okay, Elena said. Tonight. But if we're going to do this, I need to know everything. No more secrets, no more half-truths. Tell me exactly what we're dealing with, exactly what's on the other side of that door. Rebecca was silent for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. According to my great-grandfather, Theodore called it the Hollow. Not a creature, not a demon, not anything we have proper words for. It's a void, an absence, a space where reality has been removed. And it's hungry. Not for food or blood or any physical thing, but for existence itself. For the substance of our world. If it crosses over fully, if it manifests completely in our reality, it will begin to consume. Slowly at first, then faster, spreading outward from the workshop like a cancer, turning everything it touches into more of itself. More emptiness. More hollow. How do we kill something like that? We don't. We can't. All we can do is seal it away, trap it behind barriers it can't cross, and hope those barriers hold for another 100 years. Rebecca met Elena's eyes. Are you prepared for that? For the possibility that the best we can achieve is temporary containment? That someday, someone else will have to stand where you're standing now and make the same choice? Elena thought about her empty bank account, her failed business, her life that had collapsed so completely she'd been living in her truck. She thought about the $50 she'd spent on a property that had turned into a nightmare. She thought about walking away, taking Treadwell's money, letting someone else deal with this cosmic horror. but she also thought about Theodore Brennan and his workers, about ordinary people who had made a mistake and paid for it with their lives trying to fix it. About Antonio Santos and Dorothy Wren and all the families who had carried this burden for a century, waiting for the day someone would need their knowledge. "I'm prepared," Elena said. "Let's seal this thing." Rebecca smiled, the first genuine smile Elena had seen from her. "Then we'd better get started. We have about 8 hours until sunset, and a lot of work to do." They spent the afternoon in Rebecca's workshop, a converted barn on the outskirts of Millbrook County that smelled like sawdust and possibility. The space was filled with woodworking equipment, half-finished furniture projects, and, Elena was surprised to discover, an extensive library on occult subjects. "My hobby," Rebecca explained, gesturing at the bookshelves that lined one wall. "Or obsession, depending on who you ask. I've spent 30 years collecting everything I could find on binding rituals, protective magic, dimensional theory. Most of it is nonsense, medieval superstition mixed with New Age wishful thinking. But buried in all the garbage, there are kernels of truth. Practices that work, even if we don't understand why." She pulled down a thick, leather-bound book that looked older than either of them. "This one is particularly useful. It's a grimoire compiled by a Dutch occultist in the 1700s, focused specifically on sealing rituals. He called them barriers against the outside, which I think means the same thing as Theodore's door." Elena flipped through the pages, most of them written in archaic Dutch with illustrations that looked disturbing even when she couldn't understand the text. "Can you read this?" "Enough to get by. I've been studying it for years." Rebecca pointed to one section marked with a faded ribbon. "This chapter describes a sealing ritual that's remarkably similar to what Antonio documented. It uses salt circles, iron stakes, and reflected light to create what he calls a loop of negation, a space where the natural laws that allow crossing between dimensions are temporarily suspended." "Temporarily? How long does it last?" "That's the question, isn't it? The grimoire suggests indefinitely, as long as the physical components remain intact and the ritual is performed with sufficient intention and focus. But intention is subjective, focus is variable, and physical components decay. Even Theodore's seal only lasted a century, and he presumably did everything perfectly." Elena felt doubt creeping in. "So we might create a seal that fails in a year, or 10 years, or 50 years. There's no way to know." "No. But 50 years is better than 3 days, which is what we have if we do nothing." Rebecca closed the grimoire and set it aside. "The good news is that we don't have to match Theodore's seal exactly. We just have to create something strong enough to contain the hollow until someone with better knowledge or better resources can reinforce it. We're buying time, not solving the problem permanently." "And if we fail? If the seal doesn't hold?" Rebecca didn't answer immediately. She walked to the window of her workshop and looked out at the afternoon sun slanting through the trees. "Then the hollow manifests. It starts with the workshop, the building itself will begin to change, become something that shouldn't exist. The geometry will twist, rooms will appear where there should be solid walls, distances will become meaningless. Anyone inside will be lost, consumed by the transformation. And after the workshop? It spreads. Slowly at first, maybe a few feet per day. But exponentially, accelerating as it gains mass and presence. Within a week, the entire hillside. Within a month, Millbrook County. Within a year." She trailed off, leaving the rest to Elena's imagination. The scale of what they were attempting suddenly hit Elena with full force. This wasn't just about her property or her financial situation. This was about preventing an existential threat to reality itself. And she, a carpenter with no training in occult matters, was supposed to be the one to stop it. "I can't do this," Elena said quietly. "I'm not qualified. I don't know anything about magic or rituals or dimensional barriers. I fix old buildings. I replace rotten beams and restore historical details. This is completely outside my skill set." Rebecca turned from the window, her expression sympathetic but firm. "Theodore Brennan was just a craftsman too. A skilled one, certainly, but not a sorcerer or a priest or any kind of mystical expert. He was a man who made a mistake and took responsibility for fixing it, using the tools and knowledge he had available. That's all we're asking of you, take responsibility and use what you have. But he had more knowledge than I do. The collector who commissioned the box gave him instructions, rituals, specifics. And you have Antonio's account, Dorothy's instructions, this grimoire, and me. You have resources Theodore didn't have access to, information that's been gathered over a century of study and preparation. Rebecca moved closer, her voice intense. You're not alone in this, Elena. That's the difference. Theodore tried to seal the door by himself, with only his workers to help him, and the weight of it killed him. But you have me. You have my family's knowledge. And there are others who will help if we ask them. Others? The descendants of the 20 workers. Most of them left Millbrook County, scattered across the country, but some stayed. Some kept watch, kept the knowledge alive, waited for this day. I've already contacted 3 of them, they're on their way here now. By tonight, we'll have 6 people who understand what we're facing and are committed to stopping it. Elena felt some of her panic ease. 6 people. 6 families that had carried this burden for a century, all coming together to finish what Theodore Brennan had started. It still felt impossible, but at least she wouldn't be facing it alone. Okay, she said. What do we need to do first? Rebecca smiled and pulled out a detailed list written in neat handwriting. First, we gather materials. I have most of what we need here, salt, iron nails that I've collected over the years, mortar components. But we need the mirrors. 7 of them, taken from places of death. That's going to be tricky on short notice. What about using regular mirrors? Would that work? Maybe. Probably not. The mirrors aren't just reflective surfaces, they're symbolic components of the ritual. They represent transition points, thresholds between life and death, the same way the door represents a threshold between dimensions. Using mirrors that have witnessed death supposedly strengthens that symbolic resonance. Rebecca shrugged. Or it's all superstitious nonsense and any mirror would work. We don't know for certain. So we need to rob 7 hospitals or funeral homes in the next few hours. Great. Not rob. Borrow. Discreetly acquire. Rebecca grinned, and Elena caught a glimpse of the rebellious spirit that had led this woman to spend her life preparing for a supernatural crisis. I know a funeral director in the next county who owes me a favor. He might be willing to part with some mirrors from his older facilities. And there's an abandoned hospital about 30 miles from here, been closed for 15 years. If there are any mirrors still in the building, they'd definitely qualify. Breaking and entering on top of everything else. This day just keeps getting better. Think of it as creative acquisition for a good cause. Rebecca handed Elena the list. While I make some calls about the mirrors, you start gathering the other materials. Everything on this list is in the workshop, shelves along the back wall, labeled containers. We need exact amounts, so measure carefully. Elena took the list and studied it. Sea salt, 50 pounds. Iron nails, non-galvanized, 7 pieces minimum 6 inches long. Portland cement, 2 bags. Wood ash, 5 pounds. Sulfur powder, 1 pound. Silver dust, 2 ounces. Red ochre pigment, 8 ounces. Beeswax, 1 pound. Dried sage, 1 bundle. Black candles, 7. Most of it made a kind of sense, materials used in various protective rituals across different cultures. But some items puzzled her. Why silver dust? Reflects moonlight, which is itself reflected sunlight. It's symbolically purifying. The red ochre is for marking the cardinal points, it's one of the oldest pigments humans ever used, has deep connections to ritual practice. The beeswax and sage are for cleansing the space before we start the actual sealing. Rebecca was already on her phone, texting rapidly. Don't worry about understanding why each component works. Just trust that generations of practitioners have found these things effective. Elena spent the next hour measuring and packing materials into plastic containers, trying not to think too hard about what she was doing. Gathering components for a magical ritual. If someone had told her a week ago that she'd be doing this, she would have laughed. Now it felt grimly necessary, like any other construction job that required specific materials and careful preparation. Sable stayed close, watching Elena work with those intelligent eyes. The dog seemed to understand that something important was happening, that tonight would be different from all the nights before. Rebecca finished her calls and came over to where Elena was working. Good news and bad news. The funeral director will give us 4 mirrors, no questions asked. The abandoned hospital is a dead end, apparently it was stripped bare years ago, everything sold or stolen. But I have an idea for the other 3. What idea? There's a storage facility in Millbrook County where the county keeps confiscated items, evidence from closed cases, things like that. I happen to know they have mirrors from an estate sale of a house where multiple deaths occurred, a murder-suicide from 20 years ago. The mirrors were seized as evidence, never returned, just sitting in storage. How do you know this? My brother worked for the sheriff's department before he disappeared. He told me about it once, how there were all these creepy items just sitting in storage, things nobody wanted to claim or deal with. Including these mirrors. Rebecca's expression was grim. If we can get access to that facility, we can get the last 3 mirrors we need. And how do we get access? That's where things get slightly illegal. I have a key, Carlos's key, the one he never turned in. I've kept it all these years, thinking maybe someday it would be useful. Turns out today is that day. Elena felt another twinge of doubt. Breaking into a county storage facility to steal evidence. If they were caught, it would be serious criminal charges. But what was the alternative? Let the hollow consume Millbrook County and spread beyond it. Okay, Elena said. Let's do it. When? Now. Right now, before I lose my nerve. Rebecca grabbed a backpack and started loading it with supplies. The facility is mostly automated, security cameras but no guards. If we're quick and careful, we can be in and out in 15 minutes. They loaded everything into Rebecca's truck, a newer model than Elena's, thankfully, and drove toward town. Sable rode in the back seat, alert and watchful. The afternoon sun was lowering toward the county storage facility sat at the edge of Millbrook, a squat concrete building surrounded by chain link fence and security cameras that slowly panned across the empty parking lot. Rebecca pulled her truck around to the back entrance, away from the main road, where the cameras had a blind spot near the loading dock. Carlos told me about this, Rebecca said, killing the engine. He said if you ever needed to access the building off hours, this was the way in. The camera here has been broken for 2 years and they never bothered fixing it. Elena studied the building, her carpenter's eye automatically assessing the structure. Single story, reinforced concrete, small windows too high to reach easily. The back door was metal with a card reader beside it. You're sure the key still works? Only one way to find out. Rebecca pulled out a worn keycard from her wallet, holding it like a talisman. Carlos's access was never officially revoked. The department is disorganized enough that nobody thought to deactivate it when he disappeared. They approached the door together, Sable staying in the truck as lookout. Rebecca swiped the card. For a long moment, nothing happened, and Elena thought they'd have to find another way. Then the light on the reader flashed green and the lock clicked open. Thank God for bureaucratic incompetence, Rebecca whispered. Inside, the facility was dimly lit by emergency lighting, rows of metal shelving stretching into the darkness. Everything was labeled with case numbers and dates, boxes stacked in approximate order. The air smelled like dust and old paper and forgotten things. Evidence storage is in Section C, Rebecca said, consulting a map she'd drawn from memory. This way. They moved quickly through the aisles, their footsteps echoing on the concrete floor. Elena kept expecting alarms to sound, security to appear, something to stop them. But the building remained silent except for the hum of climate control systems. Section C was in the back corner, a climate-controlled room behind a locked gate. Rebecca's keycard worked here too, and they slipped inside. The shelves here held items wrapped in plastic or sealed in boxes, weapons, jewelry, documents, all the physical remnants of crimes solved and unsolved. Back at Rebecca's workshop, 3 people were already waiting. Rebecca had called ahead, told them to meet at the property, and they'd arrived early. The first was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes, introduced as Margaret Fletcher, great-granddaughter of Jonah Fletcher, one of Theodore's workers. She carried a leather satchel that clinked with glass bottles. "Blessed water from 7 churches," Margaret explained. "My family's contribution to the sealing." Jonah wrote that Theodore used holy water in the final binding, though Antonio's account didn't mention it. "I brought it just in case." The second was a young man, maybe 25, with nervous energy and calloused hands. "David Chen," he said, shaking Elena's hand firmly. "My great-great-grandfather was Wei Chen, Theodore's apprentice. I brought the invocations, prayers translated from the original Mandarin that Wei recorded. They're protection sutras, Buddhist verses meant to guard against malevolent spirits." The third was an elderly man who moved slowly but with purpose. "Robert Morrison," he introduced himself. "Samuel Morrison was my grandfather. I was 10 years old when he died, old enough to remember his warnings about the workshop. He made me promise to keep watch over it, to be ready if the seal ever failed. I never thought I'd actually have to honor that promise." "Thank you for coming," Elena said, feeling the weight of generations settling on this moment. "All of you. Your families kept this knowledge alive for a century, waiting for a day that might never come. I'm sorry it happened on my watch." "Don't apologize," Margaret said firmly. "Someone was always going to break the seal eventually. At least you had the sense to try to fix it instead of running away. That takes courage." Rebecca spread a map of the workshop property on her work table. "Here's the plan. We have maybe 2 hours of good daylight left. We need to transport all the materials to the workshop, set up the ritual components, and perform the sealing before Treadwell can interfere. Once we start, we can't stop. The ritual has to be completed in one continuous session or it won't work." "What about security?" David asked. "If Treadwell is actively trying to stop us, he could show up with people, force, whatever resources his organization has. That's why we work fast and we work together. 6 of us can carry everything in 2 trips. We set up, we perform the ritual, and we seal that chamber before anyone can stop us." Rebecca looked at each of them in turn. "This is dangerous. Whatever's on the other side of that door is aware of us now, aware that we're trying to trap it again. It will resist. The last time Theodore did this, it cost him his life. I can't guarantee all of us will survive tonight." Silence fell over the group. Elena saw fear in their faces, but also determination. These were people who had grown up with this burden, who had spent their lives preparing for a crisis they'd hoped would never come. Now that it was here, they wouldn't back down. "Let's get started," Robert said quietly. "We've waited 100 years for this. Let's finish what Theodore began." They loaded both trucks with materials: salt, cement, iron nails, the mirrors, blessed water, candles, sage, everything from Rebecca's list and more. The drive to the workshop took 15 minutes through winding roads as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. When they arrived, Elena felt her stomach drop. The workshop looked worse than when she'd left it that morning. The building seemed to sag more deeply, as if gravity had increased its pull. The air around it shimmered with heat distortion, though the afternoon wasn't particularly warm. And the door she'd left closed was standing wide open, darkness spilling out like liquid shadow. "It's getting stronger," Margaret whispered. "The hollow is bleeding through faster than we expected." They unloaded quickly, carrying materials to the entrance but not entering yet. Rebecca insisted they prepare everything outside first, organize the components in the order they'd be needed, make sure nothing was forgotten. One mistake during the ritual could be fatal. Elena found herself standing with Robert, both of them staring at the open doorway. "My grandfather described this," Robert said. "The way the building changes as the crossing gets closer to completion. He said it's like reality is getting tired, like the laws of physics are giving up in that space. He turned to Elena. When we go in there, when we start the ritual, things are going to get strange. Objects might not behave the way they should. Time might feel wrong. You might see things, hear things, feel things that aren't real. Or maybe they are real, just not from our world. Can you handle that? I don't know, Elena admitted. But I'm going to try. That's all any of us can do. Rebecca called them together. Everyone ready? Once we start, we don't stop for anything. No matter what happens, no matter what we see or hear, we complete the ritual. Understood? Everyone nodded. Then let's seal this door and put an end to Theodore Brennan's mistake. They picked up their materials and walked toward the workshop entrance, toward the darkness that waited inside, toward whatever horror had been trying to cross into their world for 100 years. Elena thought about Theodore Brennan and his 20 workers, about ordinary people facing an extraordinary crisis. About mistakes and consequences and the price of fixing what you've broken. She thought about her grandfather's words, spoken years ago before he died, the measure of a person isn't whether they make mistakes. It's whether they have the courage to fix them. This was her mistake to fix. She stepped across the threshold into the workshop, into the cold and the darkness and the waiting horror, surrounded by 5 people she barely knew but trusted completely. Behind them, headlights appeared on the road, multiple vehicles approaching fast. Treadwell had arrived. And the real battle was about to begin.